Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Next Generation of Software Developers panel. I'm Denae Ford Robinson, a senior researcher at Microsoft Research Redmond, where I lead a project here geared at supporting pathways and opportunities for the next generation of software developers. So today I have the distinct pleasure of being the moderator for today's panel with amazing thought and action leaders in thinking about this landscape. I'm joined by Mala Kumar, who is the Director of Tech for Social Good at GitHub, Margaret Price, who is a Principal Strategist for CS Education at Microsoft, and Bobby Dresser, who is the Director of Product for the Communities team at GitHub. Welcome to the panelists, and thank you so much for joining us for the summit today. So this panel will cover two core themes, which are first, what is the next generation of software developers, as in what would they include and why is it important to think of this? And theme number two, which is how do we make sure the next generation of developers succeed? So without further ado, let's get started. So to kick off this panel, I would like to give each of you the floor to say a few words about an exciting project you're currently working on and where you may see that fitting into your own personal definition of the next generation of developers. So you have the opportunity to define whatever that means for each of you. Mala, would you like to go first?
Sure. I hope everybody can hear me all right. So again, my name is Mala. I'm the Director of Tech for Social Good. And what we do at GitHub is basically fold in everything to do with the social sector. So these are nonprofit organizations, the United Nations, and other organizations, some including for-profit, that basically work on something to do with the Sustainable Development Goals and really advance human development. So that's really our focus, and a lot of our work is on open source capacity within these organizations and just what it means to basically make tech more equitable and work for everybody better. So some of the work that we're doing now that I'm especially interested and proud of is research. Coming from a field called Tech for International Development, where I spent most of my career with the United Nations, I can tell you that one of the things that, and I'm sure Denae knows this because we've had many conversations about this, is there's just a lack of research out there about how tech influences the world and how we can use it for good. Kind of an anecdote that I always give is that there's probably more research about toilet paper and paper towels than there are about the education system and technology for most countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So anything that we can do to kind of augment that research is super important. And so to that aim, we did a research project a couple of years ago that focuses on open source in the social sector and just what exactly that means, who's doing what. And then we're doing a follow-on project now focusing on 4 low and middle income countries, which are Kenya, Egypt, India, and Mexico, to kind of get the landscape of how these developer communities are working on GitHub, what they're building, why they care, and how we can better engage them in the future. So I think that's going to yield a lot of really great insights, and excited to talk more about that during this panel.
Awesome. Margaret, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Denae. It's good to be here. So I was hired into Microsoft as one of the founders of the Inclusive Design Practice, which is a method for creation that embodies the full range of human diversity to build equitable experiences for the widest number of people. And so I've spent a lot of time applying this to a range of products and services in and outside of Microsoft, as well as partnering really closely with nonprofits who want to solve some of the most wicked problems that exist in the world today. So one of the big problems I'm focused on right now is looking at the crisis of computer science education and the skills gap. So some of the problems that exist in the landscape are, of course, that there are many more jobs available than there are people to fill those jobs, and that even the people who are currently learning CS, while there are many, there are up to 3 times the number of students that want to take computer science in higher education than there are available professors to teach them. We have a huge dropout rates. Up to 80% of minority students drop out of their intro classes in higher ed. We have K through 12 students around the world who are still not exposed to computer science. So one of the big questions that I seek to answer through research, programs, partnerships, and product is how can we best prepare the next generation for jobs of tomorrow? And what does that really look like?
Awesome. I love this next generation for tomorrow. Very campaigny. Bobby, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Denae. Margaret and Mala, super interesting to hear about those projects, and I'm excited to chat more about them. As Denae mentioned, I'm Bobby. I work at GitHub on the communities team, and our group thinks a lot about how to empower open source communities to attract new contributors, to participate meaningfully with them in a way that is productive and helps them meet their goals, and then also about how open source communities can sustain and create sort of rewarding environments that encourage people to continue to participate. And one of the projects I'm particularly excited about in that broad umbrella is this piece around discovery and helping people on GitHub both discover new projects that either inspire them or educate them or connect them with some new piece of technology or new piece of infrastructure that they haven't previously encountered. And on the flip side, how we give creators on GitHub more opportunities for encouragement, more opportunities to sort of grow their communities or grow their audience or their sponsorship fan base, if that's something that they're looking for, and sort of connecting both sides of this marketplace so that the incredible work that happens across the globe on GitHub from millions and millions of developers has a easier time kind of finding its audience and creating ideally this positive sum feedback loop that can inspire people to become creators and help creators kind of continue on their journey to wherever they want to go. So there's a lot in there, but it's a very exciting problem to break off because I think it creates a lot of opportunity for people in a lot of different situations.
For sure. Okay, so this is I'm glad I let you guys do a round of intros because I think a lot of this kind of goes into the next question I had about criteria. So I heard things about engagement, empowerment, there's marginalized perspectives, even from the global perspective and in the US context as well. Can you all talk a little bit about maybe the criteria or the characterization that you all have in mind when you're thinking about the next generation of developers and what that looks like in your context or even beyond? Anyone can get started.
I can jump in. So I think a lot about students and how increasingly undergraduate and K through 12 programs are being called upon to prepare a much larger and much more diverse population of folks in careers both in and outside of computer science. And so many of these students want understandings and competencies needed to learn how to use computation collaboratively across different contexts and challenging problems, often to make a difference in the world. And so shifting language from developer for a lot of these students is really important. A lot of them don't self-identify and don't want to self-identify as developers. They want to be creators with technology to do something good in the world. And so I often think a lot about what it means to build for folks who want to learn technology as a core criteria, whether they're majoring in computer science or not.
Like this, creators of technology. Mala, were you also going to add something as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with Margaret was saying, what she was saying. So I think, the classification already is a really tough thing. So prior to working at GitHub, I joined about 2.5 years ago. I spent the majority of my career at the UN, and so nobody would ever classify me as a technologist, even though I built products that the UN would then deploy around the world. And now, ironically, at GitHub, I don't work directly on the products, so it's almost like a role reversal. But I would only be classified as a proper technologist by a lot of people from the last couple of years. So I think just being more flexible in the terminology and recognizing that tech is pervasive in basically everything we do, and that's really the case across the world. So the adoption may be different, the use cases may be different, the mental models are definitely different, and we can talk about that more in a second. But the orientation around tech is increasing globally, and I think that's a trend that we have to recognize. So we need to be a bit more cautious about how we use those words, but also flexible at the same time. So the grand irony of the situation. I think another thing to just keep in mind is there is no specific definition of developer. It's kind of like the word scientist. It's like, what exactly does that mean? So a lot of the work that we do on GitHub is on text files, but that doesn't mean that we're not using the platform in similar ways as somebody who's writing code. It just means that maybe somebody's a better writer than they are at writing syntax in the language. So I think, the ways that we use technology are also a bit nefarious. Not nefarious, but just ambiguous in the way that we would classify it. So I think going forward, being more open on what developer means, but then also recognizing, as Margaret said, that the word doesn't necessarily resonate. Like, I don't know that many people in the social sector that would call themselves developers, but they write code, or maybe they interact with code, or maybe they're a data scientist, but they wouldn't call themselves that either. So the terminologies are a bit fuzzy, I'd say.
Yeah, I would second that. I think before, and I probably had this conversation maybe with all of you at one point, was I was using this phrase called like programmers for a purpose, just trying to figure out different ways to broaden people who use programming or coding for a task specifically, but they may not, like you said, call themselves developers. Bobby, do you have a perspective to share as well?
Yeah, I agree with both of what Mala and Margaret said. I think that the cohort of folks who belong in the next generation of developers is just strictly broader than what we have today, and I think that's a really exciting thing for a variety of reasons. So education is a huge piece of that. Like there are somewhere around the order of 55 to 65% of new users to GitHub, at least the ones who fill out this little new user onboarding survey, say that they have little to no programming experience at all. And so when we think about people who are walking in the front door, there's this like overwhelming mass of folks who are expressing interest just by the act that they are taking of signing up for a GitHub account, and they are starting from scratch or close to it. And so there's a huge set of really important questions, and I'm glad Margaret is thinking about them, around how we help people get from 0 to 1 and the sort of distribution of that opportunity. At the same time, GitHub has some programs like the Global Campus Ambassadors program, sort of these programs that attach to educational environments around the world and help teachers and students use GitHub for some of their like classwork and things like that. And so we see this as a nice hands-on way to get up and running and actually open people's eyes to the way that programming and development can be super collaborative, because the solo journey, I think, is very different from the interconnected journey. And I think that's an interesting touch point in this definition of the next generation as well. Like, it's not necessarily someone sitting alone and making something by themselves. There are so many building blocks that already exist, and there are so many resources out there. So in many ways, this next chapter is about like assembling all of those things, whether they are educational resources or whether they're actual tools and pieces of infrastructure, like putting those together to achieve some set of goals. And then I love, Mala, what you mentioned at the end, like development is less and less just about pure sort of software and web development, and more about science and analysis and social work and city planning and all of these things that more and more like require technical skills and oftentimes get people to a place where they have to program to do their job or do something at scale. And I think that's a huge part of what this next generation is about, moving away from what we think of as software development, like little things that we're moving around our web browsers or our desktop applications, and getting to a place where programming is baked into so many different disciplines. And so it's less of a niche and more of like a sort of foundational requirement for a lot of different folks doing a lot of different things. This manifests on GitHub as well in a variety of ways. Like, we recently launched the ability to add a citation file to a GitHub repo because so many repositories or data sets are required to be cited, or at least there's demand for them to be cited in like published academic work. And so we think about the people who are using our platform not just as programmers, but as people doing a whole bunch of things where programming is just one little ingredient.
Yes, I was actually going to add that. So that's actually perfect for that, because I think a lot of what I'm hearing is also about different forms of collaborations that are taking place and where they're happening. So like when you're thinking about GitHub and platform, like a lot of scientists or data scientists are using those resources as places to host information. So like in ways like programming or technical contributions as a way through science. Something to think deeper about. But what I was going to ask actually was, how would you say the work that you're doing here at Microsoft or GitHub, how has it been pivotal, or how has it pivoted in a way in anticipation for the next generation?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the work that we do is with the World Health Organization. So, in response to COVID, honestly, I live in New York City, so cases started to spike here in March 2020, and so we ended up entering into an agreement to support the World Health Organization through a pretty, large contribution. But more than the contribution was the collaboration that came out of it through our professional services team and then through my team with Tech for Social Good. And so one of the things that we're always thinking about is how to make open source more equitable, how to make GitHub more equitable, and a lot of that, I think, is through the geography of it. So we see the adoption in different countries for different segments of the population, but really looking forward, and this probably gets into your next few questions, is what is the next generation? And that very much is a geographic divide, but then it's also very specific cases. So for instance, we have more capacity through GitHub on our mobile app than we ever have had before. And a lot of people have a mental model and orientation around mobile first. So if they can't interact on mobile, they're probably not going to do it. And so just having those options out there makes it more possible for more people in different countries, and low and middle income countries, especially throughout sub-Saharan Africa, to interact with these platforms. But by the same token, a lot of things are moving to cloud only. And so you need to have a base level of infrastructure to be able to access that in the first place. So I have a bit of a conundrum there, but I do think one of the things that we're just anticipating is that there's going to be a lot more people from sub-Saharan Africa, parts of South Asia and Latin America in urban areas that have a base level of literacy, understand kind of at a high level how technology might impact them, and then also see more career opportunities. And I think organizations like the World Health Organization that employ a lot of African developers is exactly one of the areas that we're trying to work with. So it was not just in response to the public health catastrophe, but also what's going to happen in the next generation anyway.
I love that. There's something that I actually had another question for later about impact. And I feel like, from what I'm hearing, part of planning for the next generation is being able to pivot. And when there's needs, being able to fulfill them or do your part, to have the resources that you have and being able to make a difference in technology in that way. And I think a lot of developers are also interested in that as well. Being able to shift and use their needs, where society needs them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, collaboration has been a cornerstone of public health for 50, 60 years. So the fact that we just had the right people in the right place and were able to get the right product to the right team was really pivotal. And that's exactly the kind of impact that we try to identify in any emergency, but even in anything that's ongoing.
For sure. Margaret, did you want to talk about one of your kind of pivot projects, or how did any of your projects pivot?
Sure. So we spend a lot of time working with diverse cohorts of students, professors, and teachers to really deeply understand and meet their needs in a holistic way. And I think that's a big pivot away from how, only focusing on product to really focusing on holistic need sets. So of course, on the product side, we look at things like how to make starting and onboarding in VS Code as easy and simple as possible for students who want to learn professional tools but feel that they're way too complex. So we've actually just launched, VS Code extension for GitHub Classroom to really help think about how these things can interconnect. And so there's a lot more product work involved. Outside of product, we've really looked at some of the core skills that are essential in addition to learning to code that are not being taught today. So things like starting a mentoring program that teaches tech resilience to students, where we've touched a couple of thousand folks who've said, gosh, I was going to drop out and now I'm not, because I learned the core skills like growth mindset and resilience and self-efficacy to help me persist in this program. And so learning that need about why students are dropping out, of course, there are multiple reasons that are multidimensional, but one of them was, a lack of mentors and a lack of learning some of the essential skills that can help you pivot and not panic when faced in difficulty. The third area is really programmatic. Partnerships. So we look at partnering with nonprofits and big companies all around the world to help this mission. So it might be, partnering with Warner Brothers or Netflix or LeBron James to launch custom curricula or challenges or hackathons to get the next generation really excited. One big piece of feedback they gave was, hey, the curricula is kind of boring that's online. We want something that's connected to solving real world problems. We want something that's exciting, that's relevant to brands that we care about today. So we're always looking for those perspectives to help build this holistic strategy because, of course, product is not enough. So we really need to look at how we can support learner success and break a lot of the existing barriers. And so I know we'll get in a little bit later to some of the skills that need to be learned, and so I can talk more about that then.
I love that you brought up sort of the retention rate of folks who have started down an education path and then drop off for a variety of reasons. Our team has thought about some really similar challenges, and I think it's core to what it means to help this next generation actually be successful. And so I mentioned those stats for new users joining GitHub, and we sort of noticed that and used it as a launch pad to reimagine the sign-up experience when you go to create a github.com account. Taking it from like a very standard basic form to something that's a little bit more compelling and helps people feel like they're taking their first steps towards understanding what they came to GitHub to learn. And obviously there's a long ways to go, and it comes back to some of the earlier points I made around discovery and helping match people with the right contribution opportunity or the right getting started project or the right set of resources to make sure that they can go from 0 to 1. But there's a lot of interesting challenges there, and that's at least one recent example of how our team's work has pivoted to help empower the next generation. And then I also mentioned open source. Like, open source is not new, but it certainly has gone through a variety of culture shifts over the past several decades. And one thing we're very conscious of going forward is how to, keep open source happening, and not just happening, but making it much, much stronger in terms of a viable career path for folks, something that people of any type of background can actually look at and say, this is something that I could do, and it also has the potential to sustain me as a full-time job. And if we look at the past 15 years or so, oftentimes open source is limited to folks who have nights and weekends to spend, or who are employed by a large tech company and can use some of their working hours to participate in open source. And we want to really get this to a place where working full-time on an open source project is this actual career path that people see and pursue, and is a way for them to work full-time for themselves or full-time for the internet and really give away a piece of software that becomes a building block. And so that, to me, is a key piece of this next future, transitioning open source from just an option for folks who have the luxury of extra time and extra bandwidth to a place where it is sustainable and rewarding for anyone who has the skills and capacity and interests to making it happen. And that's a lot of the rationale and thinking behind GitHub Sponsors, which is in its second year and continues to grow really tremendously, and obviously has a long way until this opportunity is evenly distributed. Like, we're live in 34 countries and wish we were live in 200. So there's certainly a lot of work cut out for us, but making baby steps towards that end goal, I think, is another really important ingredient in helping this next generation succeed.
Oh, for sure. I actually enjoy how all of you mentioned kind of expanding or broadening the scope of how the projects you work on can reach. But with broadening the scopes kind of introduces like broader and bigger challenges and issues. And I know we have a bunch of academic researchers, practitioners, people in the industry watching as well. And I'm a strong proponent of like the more heads we have on a problem, the more creative solutions we can come up with to solve them. So I'm curious if you all could share what are some of the biggest challenges or biggest needs or gaps that you think we need or we have that we need to fill to support the next generation.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things continuing this thread of open source participation is this mismatch between sort of contributor energy and maintainer bandwidth, where oftentimes the core challenge of an open source project isn't that there aren't enough people who want to help, it's the coordination challenge of taking that potential energy and applying it to the right set of problems. And oftentimes that burden ends up entirely on the maintainer to say, here are these issues that are ready for someone, and let me answer these 200 questions so that this set of people can get up and running. And like the quality of the people walking in the door is a really important ingredient in making sure that project ends up being successful. So we've invested pretty substantially over the past couple of months in a new feature for GitHub called Discussions, which is a companion to the issues that folks might be familiar with on a GitHub repository, and really gives contributors a place to show up and ask open-ended questions. And those could range from, hey, this project is interesting, how do I get set up, to, have you thought about this very specific feature request, to, hey, I think the contributing guidelines need to be updated because X, Y, and Z. So it really, I think, gives the community a place to gather and discuss things with a little bit more depth and context and nuance than issues which are traditionally focused around getting something done or filing a bug. And then the sort of meta goal is to create this place where the community can help each other rather than having all of that fall on the maintainer's shoulders. And this is like our hypothesis is that this will help open source communities scale beyond just requiring the maintainer's energy and attention for every sort of incremental bit of progress, it can really help itself thrive and scale to a new level. And in doing so, becomes ideally much more comfortable and open to newcomers, folks who might not know as much, and don't have to open an issue, which is like baked into its name. Something is wrong, like this is an issue, and really carves out an explicit space to say, hey, I'm new. Does anyone have a moment to help me out? Or, hey, I'm having trouble getting set up, or I don't understand how to apply this library to X, Y, and Z. And kind of opening the door and making sure that that type of participation, that type of curiosity is celebrated on GitHub and not sort of pushed to the margins. So hopefully that's like a step. And again, with all of these things, there's a lot to go, but we're excited to see that take off and chip away at making open source a little bit more welcoming to newcomers.
I think one of the things that Bobby mentioned is something that's been on my mind for 2.5 years now is discovery. One of the first insights that we gathered from our research on open source in the social sector, so the report that we published back in April 2020 and the research we started in April 2019, was that, especially in the social sector, and this makes sense, people don't necessarily galvanize around a technology solution. Like, they don't care about if somebody's writing something in R or in Python. They don't care about if this is on this stack. What they care about is a cause, right? They care about bettering the world around them. They care about making sure that people have more equitable access, that human development progresses. And so discoverability is like a disproportionate challenge in the social sector for people who are searching by keywords, or for organizations, for people who kind of need that reinforcement to understand what's already out there. And so I think one of the things that we can do at GitHub, and then hopefully, the tech sector writ large, is just making technology more searchable by causes, the things that people actually care about. I think another thing that we've invested a lot in Tech for Social Good is the community building aspect. So we actually recently launched a website for a monitoring and evaluation community called the Merle Center. And so everybody collaborates on GitHub. We staged a GitHub Pages site so that their content is accessible by other people who don't want to necessarily interact with the platform. But it's basically all text-based at this point. Might progress to some code if somebody wants to add a script in, for example, for a data clean. But it's working in, I think, a pretty creative way, but also habitualizing people to the platform. And it's a great example because more than a quarter of our members are women of color, and we have quite a few people from sub-Saharan Africa participating. So just thinking about the exact same contribution that they can put in a Word document or in a Google Doc on GitHub, just, again, orients them to the platform and hopefully opens the door up for something maybe more depth in the future.
Yeah, and to build on, I completely agree. Everything you're saying, yes. The exposure and the different layers of exposure and discovery from I can learn a set of skills to I understand how I can apply these skills to I understand what career is feasible and possible as a direct result of learning these skills. And so we're thinking a lot about those different layers and how we can help. So as an example, looking at a lot of the industries that are hiring for these skills, maybe that's healthcare as an example. So what would it mean to provide the curricula that is grounded in solving real-world healthcare problems to make social impact? The career pathways, what would it mean to provide a series of videos for people who were already working in these jobs, and how did they get there, and what was their journey, and what was their path? And, in addition to kind of the exposure, we're looking a lot at those dropout rates because, of course, the direct result is a less diverse workforce. So we know that far too many talented people either actively avoid or choose to leave, whether that's middle school, high school, college, or college to career, tech fields, because of perceptions and realities of negative cultures. So what does it mean to invest in the core preparation of students, whether in computer science, engineering, or other fields, to take agency and ownership over tech pathways that could dramatically shift the climate in tech, and investing in the training of current employees in tech spaces to help shift the culture such that when these students get hired and start their jobs, they can feel a sense of inclusion and belonging. And so we're doing a lot of work in that space as well. And the third kind of challenge to your question, Denae, that we're looking at solving is, how we can solve the kind of educator capacity crisis. So we know that there are so many educators that are oversubscribed, and we want to help. So what does that mean in terms of providing more support? and also more curricula for students so that we can help them directly.
I love how you talked about how we can help them directly, because I actually wanted to pivot to our second theme a bit now, which is how do we make sure the next generation succeeds? And my first question we have in that perspective is, what can we do now? What should we be doing now in our work and our research projects to best create an environment where people can not just succeed, but thrive? So I want to, clarify that there's a distinction between there. How do we help people kind of overreach and attack their dreams, or kind of reach their dreams and their goals? I wonder if you all have thought about that at all.
Yeah, so from our side, we thought a lot about needing a way for students to gain core skills and for professionals already working in this space to continue practicing, developing, and adapting their knowledge in a way that's customized for them on their career path. And so we've spent a lot of time building a research-based toolkit involving core psychology, education, and team-based concepts to look at how do we situate scenarios and strategies in a way that's directly relevant, teaching some of this core skills that students don't graduate with and that create huge cyclical problems in the workplace. So as an example, how people learn to overcome obstacles they encounter, how effective teams are constructed, how to gauge group dynamics in hybrid, remote, or in-person environments, how to navigate conflict, how people can contribute to environments around them to make them more or less inclusive. And there are surely more, of course, but the reality is only a small subset of students are opting to take courses in organizational behavior or leadership, and only a small subset of employees are opting to take leadership courses. And so we're thinking a lot about and launching sets of curricula to help kind of solve this, but certainly a lot more research and time is needed to really think through these barriers, both on the student side and ensuring that they're learning skills like growth mindset, resilience, self-regulation, emotional intelligence, and more, and that those core skills are also taught to folks in industry so that, to your point, it's not just succeed, but thrive, and making sure that people have the skills and the abilities to really think about what does thriving mean and how to create sense of belongingness for yourself and for all of those around you. And so we have a mentoring program and set of curricula targeting both students and professionals. And there's still so much work to be done in that space.
It's really wonderful to hear about some of this research that you're doing, Margaret. I think these are really nuanced problems, especially some of these public forums for collaboration among anyone who walks in off the internet and wants to jump in and start coding with each other. There are really nuanced social dynamics and pretty sort of gnarly ways that participation can go wrong and really tremendous ways that it can go right. And one of the keys, I think, to designing solutions that actually work for the right set of folks, this inclusive and broad definition of whatever the next generation counts as, includes research. And so we've had the pleasure of working directly with Denae over the past several months to actually understand how some of these problems manifest and how our different solutions can be validated or invalidated from folks with different backgrounds. There's, I think, a tendency in fast-paced product development to jump to a solution and deliver something to your users as quickly as possible. And I can't overstate enough how helpful some of Denae's research has been in setting a foundation and orienting us towards a set of solutions that have the right sort of texture and context and framing so that they work for these dynamics that otherwise we might back ourselves into a corner with. So research is crucial, and taking the time to actually understand the problem space and back that up as much as possible with real input from the folks that you're solving for, I think is a crucial ingredient in making this happen. And the second thing I'll mention is definitions. So I mentioned the difference between the word issue and the word discussion earlier on. And I love that you're pressing us on trying to define what this next generation of developers looks like, because that also sort of sets the parameters for what we even consider building. and repositioning even what GitHub thinks it's about, from people building websites and people doing specific software development together, or people building open source frameworks, to a place where any text file can exist, any piece of code, any sort of large project with a bunch of tendrils can exist that could be applied in any possible discipline, I think is a shift in the way that we think about building for our users. It acknowledges not just users 1, 2, and 3, but also users 4 through 10 who might be a different age and from a different country and have a very different sort of baseline understanding for how to interact with some sort of web-based product. As Mala mentioned earlier, like even having something like a mobile app is a totally different partner in some of this stuff and delivering value to folks. So making sure we're careful about defining what we are aiming towards and defining as broadly as possible the set of folks that we're trying to solve these problems for. Both of those things are deeply important, I think.
I think, yeah, I echo the comments that Bobby and Margaret made. I think one of the challenges that we're always facing, especially being a relatively small team, is just directing that energy and productivity into the correct channels. When COVID started to spike here in the States, the number of activities that we saw that had been tagged, the repositories that had been tagged in public health or even WHO, even if it wasn't an official repository of the organization, it spiked. It went up. People wanted to say, how can I use my tech in order to, solve COVID? And I think, unfortunately, that reductive reasoning is part of the issue that we have in the industry, because we use this term solving problems as though problems are simple and can be solved directly through technology. Sometimes tech is very, very small as part of the solution, right? It's increasingly important, and that's why we're all here, but we have to recognize that the policies, the structures, the systemic racism, or whatever the underlying issues that we're dealing with are really the reason why we're in the position that we are. And so we have to recognize where the tech can be directed and what exactly it can do in order to make, to move the needle in the correct direction. And so, back to that example with the World Health Organization, if I just imagine so many times, like, what if we had been able to take all of those developers and just say, chill, and just let us help you find the best place to plug in, the best place to use your skills, because WHO has a lot of needs. They're building a lot of tools. There's a lot of organizations that have been working on these public health issues with infectious diseases for 20, 30 years. They need your help, but we need to figure out how we can actually make sure that your contributions make sense instead of trying to build an app that's going to magically, resolve COVID. And that's something that only comes with experience. Once you're based in whichever country in sub-Saharan Africa working for the UN, I can say from experience, you realize how complicated these things really are. And so I think one simple thing that tech companies can do is just to hire more people from these fields. There's a lot of international development practitioners like me who are deeply oriented into tech that can come in and make valuable contributions. And I know Microsoft's done that. GitHub did that with hiring me. And that just helps you identify opportunities. And Margaret mentioned her mentor program. We have something similar through skills-based volunteering. We hired a program manager, Cynthia, who leads that exact work. So she works with social sector organizations like the UN to identify a specific need, hooks them up with the GitHub staff, and then those people solve that specific issue together. And so then all of a sudden you've got GitHub staff who understand that, wow, my skills are really valuable for this specific thing, and this thing is going to help something in the world. And then WHO staff or whichever organization at the UN understands the depth of their technical ask. And so that kind of exchange, I think, is really important and it's valuable. And GitHub is the kind of company that can really facilitate that through our platform with the openness and transparency that we have. And so I think if we just invest more research and time into figuring out more sustainable solutions and how to scale those kind of solutions for that direct collaboration, whether it's within different countries or people of different socioeconomic classes or races or whatever that exchange may be, there's a lot that we can do on the existing technology. Instead of trying to reinvent that tech piece, I think we need to get better at how we actually use it.
Yes to all of that. I'm so glad I was on mute. And
Thanks for listening to my sermon.
I'm here for it. So we only have a few more minutes left, and this is actually maybe a great point to end on. And Mala, your point about kind of moving the needle, or how people figure out before figuring out what technology to build, is figure out what are the challenges and expertise that already exist in this space, and then have them sit in the room where the experts in that space are, and then you can build the tech to make it work. I may be priming heavily here, so I apologize, but I'm curious if you all are anticipating a shift in our technical culture do you see that there will be a shift where we're listening to the experts, the technical experts who are not coding or not software engineers? Are we seeing a shift where we're focusing on their perspective first and using their expertise as consultants in a way? And I'm curious if maybe I'm just biased because the work that I'm doing and the participants that I'm talking to in my studies, but I'm curious as what this looks like for you all, especially as you're working in different settings, Margaret, in the classroom, in different types of not just K-12 environments with people with different ranges of skills. Are you seeing something similar? Or are you anticipating something similar?
Yes. I think, unfortunately, we're still in the middle of COVID. That's the only way to phrase it, right? Like, we all thought that, I think a lot of us thought that COVID would have abated largely by now, but it's continuing to rage on, and we're seeing new variants. And so a lot of the, from an emergency perspective, a lot of the lessons learned can only come in hindsight, so I'm sure we'll know more in the coming years. I do think COVID was transformational in a lot of ways, and I think part of that is just, it's salient on a lot more people's minds of how far into issues like climate change and natural disasters and all of the things that come with the new world order, how deep we are and how much we have to do with that. So I am hoping that our attention and our funding will go more to these underlying issues so that we can become more resilient as a global society. So hopefully, I think, again, from the cause area, we'll see some change in how tech is applied and what people prioritize.
I completely agree with everything that was just said. I think, from the student angle, we see that shift in what's being taught to whom. And, students asking consistently for learning not only the tech skills, but the problem finding and framing skills. To your earlier point about, it's not just applying technology, but where and how can you contribute your skills in a meaningful way, and being able to take a step back and really think through, what does that look like? How do you find the right opportunities? How do you frame those opportunities? How do you work with diverse skill sets of people who have an understanding of how to do research, how to design, how to plug into social structures, and many, many, many more. And so I think the demand for those interdisciplinary skills is increasing, to your point. And so I think because we're seeing that, we'll continue with those skills as students graduate and enter the workforce, and in their learning environments look for projects to make impact on. We'll continue to see that shift happening.
Yeah, I also see and experience and am hopeful for this sort of tectonic shift. I don't know that it will be brought about by folks paying more attention to experts. Like, when I think about the next generation of developers, I think about permissionless innovation happening across the globe with increasingly sophisticated building blocks, which is, I think, a core part of it. A developer who's learning to program today might be using Copilot when 20 years ago, I don't know, in a university computer science course, they're writing everything in C. And so the actual starting point is a moving target and becomes more and more sophisticated, which is like a really empowering launch pad. And the cool part is that a lot of those increasingly sophisticated building blocks, not all of them granted, but more and more of them are freely available to lots of different people. Like, software development today is easier and more robust than it was 20 or 30 years ago, and is also cheaper. And so that means a lot of lovely things. And I think there's sort of like a balancing cultural force where this is somewhat anecdotal, but I think in a lot of ways that the youth, so to speak, are increasingly socially aware. They're inheriting a broken planet. They are very sort of connected with other folks around the world, for better or for worse. And so I think applying some of these challenges of the life ahead of them and trying to address them through software development is an interesting sort of marriage. And we see fun things like people increasingly fan-personing over NASA's recent launches and how that sort of like ripples across GitHub, or some of this open insulin hacking that happens on GitHub and creates quite a splash. Just basically applying these sophisticated building blocks to a whole set of challenges beyond, again, what we are used to, and sort of open-ended, pointing towards the future. so that's very exciting. I think it's hard to say where it will go. I don't know that people who are in positions of expertise will be consulted perhaps as much as they should be. Like, it's often a shame how much knowledge and experience gets built up, and then someone trying to solve a problem like recreates the wheel. Like, it sounds like, Mala, you experienced something similar with the like frenzy of like valid and celebrated positive action after COVID, but potentially like disjointed, and when in reality it could be nice to all listen to a person who knows what they're talking about. That thing might happen again, but hopefully it is more evenly available, and folks from different backgrounds can participate and solve these problems the way that they want to solve. I have no idea what that will look like, but I'm excited to see.
Yes, and it sounds like a discovery issue part two, which is like, okay, there's experts. Do the people building technology familiar with where the experts' resources are, where they have shared that knowledge, how to reach them? So that's like an additional layer of discovery we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's twofold. I think organizations are becoming more open, and I think it's largely because of the work that GitHubs and Microsofts are doing. So that culture change is really important. Like Margaret talked about the organizational management piece, and that's huge. It's not, the most desired, talked about thing in tech, but it's really important sometimes. And so I think on one side you're seeing that, but then on the other side we do have to figure out how can we take that excitement and that momentum that Bobby's talking about through, the breakdown of barriers, especially with learning how to code or putting something out there for the world to see, and just channel it into more productive ways, especially when it comes to these causes where, 10 hours of lost time is a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. Well, with that, we're going to end the panel there. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I wish everyone was here in the room so we can all clap for the panelists, but I'll clap for you all myself. It's been a pleasure getting to work with you all, even in passing, have amazing conversations about research problems, and I'm just glad we were able to do that on a public stage for people to hear. So thank you all, and I guess that's it, so we can have a great day.
Thanks today. Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Mala.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.